Thank you, Matt and worship team, for leading us this morning. As you know, I have a family with 4 kids, and they are, most of them, 3 out of the 4 of them are teenagers. The 4th one, Elena, our youngest, just had a birthday yesterday, and so we got to celebrate. She turned 11 years old, so she's right on the cusp, that preteen stage. One of the things that we as parents have had to navigate over these last number of years as our children grew up and became parts of their community and went to high school is, what do you call a friend? Who actually are your friends and who are not your friends? With each of our children along the way, we've had these conversations as we've seen who they're hanging out with, where they're spending time, and the effect that those friendships have had on them. We've talked about how your friends are those that look out for you. They've got your back. They build you up. They encourage you. They make you better than you are by yourself. We've also talked about what friends aren't. Friends don't make you feel bad. Friends don't talk behind your back. Friends don't leave you hanging. You know, they do answer your snaps. They keep that streak going. That's a true friend, apparently. But someone that doesn't walk with you in that way, someone that undermines your self-confidence, someone that leaves you feeling bad or hurts you with their words or their actions, this is not a true friend. Friendship is defined by their actions, not just by saying they're a friend. And so we've had the privilege as parents to help guide our children to discern which of the people they're hanging out with actually are friends and those who are not. This story today that we are reading from Matthew chapter 5 has an encounter between Jesus and Levi. And it culminates in verse 32, where Jesus talks about his mission and why it is that he would even spend a moment talking to someone like Levi, becoming friends with someone like Levi. Jesus says it very plainly, that his mission is to bring healing to those who need healing. The word that is used here in the text is physician. Those who are in need of healing need a physician. Those who are healthy, they don't need a doctor, a physician. We know that in this context of the last couple of years, our healthcare system has been stretched and stretched. So many of our frontline healthcare workers are so tired. And I hope that you are praying for them regularly, that you are encouraging those that you're connected to who are part of our healthcare system and walking with them, lifting them up, and doing everything you can to be part of getting our community through these health crises that we face. But I have a question for you about what a doctor is and what a true doctor would look like. What would you think of a doctor who would withhold treatment or medicine from a patient in need? What do you think of that? Certainly, one of the questions that ethicists and our healthcare system has been talking about, as resources are stretched thinner and thinner, how to decide who will receive priority in treatment. But never is the question, should we or should we not give medicine? Should we or should we not withhold treatment to someone in need? think you could say that someone who has the medicine or the knowledge to provide treatment for those who are ill, if they would hold back, that person has betrayed their oath as a doctor. I don't think we would even call that person a doctor. I think we might have some very other unkind kind of names. Here in the story of Jesus and Levi, we encounter this tax collector. Luke doesn't really say much more about Levi as such, because the name tax collector actually kind of says it all. What is a tax collector in that time and in that place? Many of you have heard these kinds of comparisons before. And Levi isn't the only tax collector we encounter in the scriptures. We also have another wonderful story of Jesus and a tax collector, Zacchaeus, the short one, who has to climb a tree so that he can see Jesus. There is a parallel between the story of Jesus calling Levi to follow him and the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. In both of those stories, Jesus goes to their home and eats with them, sits at their table. This is shocking. This is scandalous. This is a problem for the upstanding members of the community, particularly those who see themselves as those who provide boundaries, the Pharisees, those who know what is right and wrong and know which boxes ought to be checked off if you are going to be a fine, upstanding member of the community. Levi, as a tax collector, is working either for Herod, who is a terrible king for the people of Israel at that time, or by extension, he's working for the Romans, who are foreign occupiers, oppressors, who have created all kinds of rules and laws for the people of Israel and Judea, keeping them from worshiping in the way that they want to, and introducing all kinds of pagan gods and practices and idolatry. Levi, at best, is an unsavory character in his community. At worst, he's a collaborator with the enemy, a traitor to his own people. Certainly not a fine, upstanding citizen, no matter how wealthy he has become. In fact, his wealth actually points to the reality that he likely has cheated many of his own community members of their resources. When Jesus comes to his home for this banquet, it says it's a great banquet, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But the others who are at the tables, enjoying this banquet together with Levi and Jesus and the disciples, it says they too are tax collectors like him. These are his only friends, those who are on the outside, those who know that they are not welcome in good society, those who are judged and looked down upon. But in this story, it says, as Jesus is going along, remember, he has just called Simon Peter and his fishermen friends and welcomed them into his group of disciples and invited them to become fishers of men, of people, to invite people into this kingdom work that he is beginning. And now he comes along and invites Levi. Now, Simon Peter and the other fishermen may have not smelled all that great and may have been really rough around the edges. And so maybe you wouldn't have thought of them first as disciples, those that a rabbi would want to call as his followers. But Levi, a traitor, certainly someone who is seen as unclean. Why in the world would Jesus invite him to come along? And yet he does. Jesus says to us, Luke really makes this text really short here, and he just says, he comes along, says to Levi, hey, follow me. And what does Levi do? We don't know if there's more conversation or not, but Luke certainly doesn't seem to say so. It says that Levi, in that moment, gets up from his tax collecting table probably in the public square. He gets up, leaves everything behind, and follows Jesus. And then he throws a huge party to let everyone know that he is now walking with this rabbi. Whether he knows that he's the Messiah or not at this point, we don't know. But he knows that he is a teacher of truth, a performer of miracles, someone who speaks the words of God with authority, someone who is proclaiming a new and better way, and someone who welcomes him into relationship, to sit at the same table. It says here in this very short text that there are Pharisees and their scribes there as well, and they are critical of what's going on. How can it be, they say to the disciples, that you are willing to sit at these tables with these unclean outcasts, these pariahs of our society? This is unheard of, and this just doesn't fly. Well, you know, the Pharisees, I will give it to them. Their diagnosis of the problem is correct. Their diagnosis of the illness, the disease that infects Levi and his companions is right. They are unclean. They don't belong. They are not people you want to associate with in normal society. But the course of action that the Pharisees and the scribes want to follow is wrong. You see, they are living under a paradigm of law, a paradigm of what righteousness is and isn't. And when you encounter that which is unclean, that which is not permissible, what do? You avoid at all costs. You try to stay as far away from it as you can. And from a distance, you judge and you point out the wrong and condemn the wrong. And you create as much distance as you can between yourself and this contaminating illness. Why do you need to create this distance? Because you do not want to contaminate your own righteousness. You do not want to share in the uncleanliness of these unworthy people. You know, you and I, here and now, in our humanness and in our brokenness, we often too, like the Pharisees, live in this kind of a worldview. Honestly, let's have a little honest conversation, brothers and sisters. Honestly, in our community, in your workplace, in your school, maybe even in your family, who do you look at and think, wow, they are terrible people? I know, it hits a little close to home, doesn't it? Who do you look at and think, they don't belong here? No one should be around them. They are so far from God. They are so far from righteousness. And in fact, I would rather avoid them if I could. They're immoral. They're mean, untrustworthy, objectionable in so many ways. I think the truth is, sadly, that we often walk in our community and in our circles with the eyes of the Pharisees, trying to create distance between us and those that we see as unworthy. Like I said, it's the right diagnosis, but it's the wrong course of treatment. You see, what Jesus is doing here, the reason that Jesus extends this invitation to Levi, is because he is bringing a new way of looking at the world. The kingdom view of things, no longer bound by the legalism of the law of Moses. In this kingdom way, there are new possibilities, new opportunities, new rules for living. There is the possibility of forgiveness, renewal, and reconciliation. This is what we would call a paradigm of grace. Jesus brings grace to the conversation. He brings invitation. He seeks Levi out. It doesn't say here that Levi was already kind of following along, hanging on the edges of the crowd, and then Jesus says, "Oh, you're listening. I think you get it. Come on in." It says Jesus goes to him and says, "Hey, you, follow me." And then there is welcome and moving towards, as Jesus sits at a table with Levi and shares a great banquet together. You see, in the paradigm of grace, Jesus brings healing, as he proclaimed in his inaugural sermon in Nazareth. He brings freedom for those who are oppressed not only by the systems that they live in and inhabit, but oppressed by their own sin and brokenness that holds them down and pulls them from relationship with God and others. The paradigm of grace offers authentic relationship, connection, community, welcoming into the circle of relationship. Now, this kind of relationship that Jesus is offering is a purposeful relationship. It's a relationship and entering into the space, sitting at the table together in order to share the grace of God, in order to bring the invitation to life, to reconciliation. It's not simply about joining in on the party that Levi might be throwing. We as Christians, followers of Jesus, have often embraced this understanding of grace so that we ought not to be judgmental of others. And we love that. We shouldn't be judgmental. We shouldn't judge others. But unfortunately, often we have stayed there in that space of not bringing judgment, but then have not brought peace. We have not brought life. We haven't brought the person of Jesus into the mix. This kind of paradigm of grace is not a license to stay where we are without transformation, without redemption. It's invitation and relationship with purpose. You know, living with a judgmental eye to things is pretty easy. It's easy to spot the sinners. It's easy to see who is them, the outsiders, the ones that really need to find God. You know who I'm talking about, right? What's more difficult to acknowledge is that we often are those very same ones who need healing, who need the touch of the great physician in our own hearts and lives. We are talking here of the banquet at Levi's house and the banquet at the house of Zacchaeus. But there are other banquets that are talked of in Scripture. There's one where Jesus is at a meal at the house of one of the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, as we know, are those who take pride in having lived righteously, doing the right thing, saying the right thing, going through the motions of faith. And it's interesting, if you compare the banquet at the house of this Pharisee to the banquet at the house of Levi. In the banquet at the house of Levi, Jesus is there, and he's there with them intentionally in relationship, inviting them to walk with him. The banquet at the house of the Pharisee, Jesus makes mention of just how in this place of righteousness and this upstanding, faithful citizen, how he has been treated with a lack of hospitality, how his feet have not been washed, and how rather than washing and cleansing themselves in a way that actually cleans their hands, they go through a ritual which only does that as a representation. And actually, there is not cleanness in that home. Levi knows his need. Levi knows his disease. And when Jesus gives him the invitation, he abandons everything to follow in this offer of hope and relationship. Sometimes we think that we as Christians need to point out what's wrong with people's lives, to point out the sin and the darkness and the brokenness, and the anger and the hatred, as if people don't know that that darkness is already within them. Like Levi, most people know the disease that has grown within their hearts. Do we know ours? Will we, like Levi, leave it all behind to walk in this way of grace? Will we follow Jesus? Which brings us to the point of all of this. Relationship for Christ is about purpose, to share grace and invitation, to share the opportunity to enter into reconciling life with God. When I think about my world that I inhabit, the question that we carry with us ought to be, who here in my life, who here in my circle, who here in my sphere of influence is in need of healing? And by extension then, the question is, who in my life should I be moving towards rather than avoiding and creating distance? As a disciple of Christ, will we carry out this mission that we have been commissioned, called into, to serve with self-sacrificing love, to bring healing and hope, reconciliation, and new life? Brothers and sisters, we have in our hands the medicine to heal the lives of people around us, to heal their hearts, to heal their souls, to bring new, redeeming life into reality. Are we withholding that medicine, that treatment, that presence of Jesus from others? What might that look like if we were to move towards this paradigm of grace in our lives? Well, I have a few examples in mind, and I'm sure that you each have other examples that would come to mind for you. Maybe you have a coworker, a colleague who is just a frustrating person to be around, and you avoid conversation if at all possible. What would it look like to, instead of stepping away, to step forward and to invite into an authentic conversation? To be willing to be vulnerable and to say, this is how I have experienced our relationship. I would like a better way of relating to you. Can we move towards that? Is there a way that we can build each other up? Maybe not become friends, but at least walk in such a way that we don't have this tension between us. Maybe you, like I, have a relative that you just do not get along with. You do not agree with them, and in fact, there are lots of reasons to disagree. Rather than pulling away and shutting the door, what would it look like to invite them into a space where you can hear their heart? You can see what is behind what they hold to so strongly. Why are these views so important to you? What drives the way that you think? I'd like to understand where that anger comes from, where that pain comes from. And in understanding, maybe we can see each other through different eyes. Or maybe you have a friend that has let you down, and you've become distant from them, and you just don't talk anymore. What would it look like if you would be the one to take the step towards reconciliation, to hold out the possibility of forgiveness, a path to repair the relationship? Maybe not to where it used to be, but at least a place where you can walk in peace with one another and not carry that heavy weight upon your heart. Or maybe you have an estranged family member. For whatever circumstances of your past or childhood, or the choice of a lifestyle that places themselves at the center rather than others and family. Or maybe other concerns, things like identity and sexuality. What would it be like if we would offer care for their well-being with intentionality, an authentic relationship, and offer a blessing to them and assure them of our care and prayers for them? What might be the harvest from such a movement? There are so many other ways in which we can reach out, move towards those that we think of poorly. And I pray that you will take space and time to listen to the nudges of the Spirit of God within you, saying, how can I move towards others? Because here's the thing. If Jesus is willing to invite a traitor, collaborator with the enemy, a cheater, someone who is unclean, into his inner circle, to walk with him, to minister with him, and to call him his beloved friend. If Jesus will do that for Levi, and Jesus has done that for me, who am I to deny that medicine to someone who is dying from the disease of sin? This morning we want to celebrate together in the Lord's table. The Lord's table is often talked about as a feast, a banquet. We've already talked about some banquets today. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus tells a parable of a banquet in which he invites all those who seem to be those who ought to be at the table, but for various reasons, they decline the invitation and turn away. And so Jesus, in this parable, says how the master tells the servants to go out and invite those who are on the margins, those who are broken, those who are lost, those who are lying in the ditches because life has passed them by, those who are in need, and to invite them to this great banquet. There's a line in that story in Luke 14 that just grabs hold of my soul. The servants come back after inviting everyone they can find, and they said, "We've invited them and they have come." And there's still room at the table. I want you to know this, that whoever you are, whatever is going on in your life, no matter how far you feel from those in your life that you would like to be close to, no matter how far from God that you feel right now, this invitation is for you. There's a spot at the table for you. There's still room. And Jesus is welcoming you to come in, to eat together, to enjoy the gifts of life at the table of the Father. Jesus is this host for us at the table, to leave our sin, to leave our brokenness, to come and walk with him and join in this joyful celebration of grace. This grace is which is for you and for me and for all.
Thank you for listening to this message from Fort Garry MB Church. We hope that what you heard challenged you to think in new ways about Jesus Christ and the life that we are called to through his death and resurrection. If you have any questions about who we are as a church, our mission, or have any other questions in general, please do not hesitate to contact our office email at info@fgmb.ca. Be blessed.